The scent of iron and unwashed bodies filled the damp stone cell. You think the guillotine was her end? No. Her execution began months before the blade fell, in the shadows where even God refused to look. They didn't just want her head, they wanted to erase the very soul of the woman who was once a queen. If you believe the world deserves to know the cost of such justice, keep watching and share this truth. The sky over Paris in October 1793 was the color of a bruised lung, heavy with a cold, relentless drizzle that washed the filth of the streets into the rising Seine. The city did not sing. It growled with the hunger of the guillotine, and the air carried a metallic tang, a mixture of wet stone and the lingering scent of iron from the executioner's blade. Below the surface of the bustling, bloodthirsty capital, the Conciergerie fortress stood like a jagged tooth of rock, its walls weeping with saltpeter, and the dark, rhythmic pulse of the river outside. Rosalie Lamorlière, a young woman with weary eyes and hands roughened by lie, stepped through the iron-studded doors. She was a simple servant, a face lost in the crowd of the revolution, tasked with a duty that made her heart hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. She carried a tray with a single flickering candle and a bowl of thin, watery gruel, her breath blooming in the frigid air as she followed the heavy, rhythmic thud of a guard's boots. Gilbert, the Revolutionary Guard leading her, was a man built of sharp angles and hardened resentment. His uniform was stained, and he carried a pike as if it were an extension of his own spite. He didn't look back at Rosalie. To him, she was as invisible as the rats scurrying through the shadows. "Cell 12, Gilbert spat, the words hitting the damp floor like stones. He shoved a massive iron key into the lock, the screech of metal on metal echoing through the vaulted corridor, a sound known to many as the final note of their earthly lives. As the door groaned open, the smell hit Rosalie first. It was a suffocating cocktail of rot, stagnant river water, and the unwashed misery of hundreds who had passed through this Antechamber of Death. The room was barely 3 square meters, a tomb of black mold and weeping stone. Water seeped through the cracks in the floor, pooling around the legs of a narrow iron bed. In the corner, sitting on a fragile wooden chair that looked ready to shatter, was a shadow. Rosalie hesitated, her candle casting long, trembling fingers of light across the cell. She expected to see a monster. The revolutionary pamphlets had described a widow Capet, who was a depraved witch, a creature of gold and greed who drank the blood of the poor. But as the light reached the figure, Rosalie's hand shook so violently that the gruel nearly spilled. The woman was skeletal. Her dress, once a garment of fine silk, was now a tattered rag of mourning black, stained with the grime of the prison and the salt of her own tears. Her skin was not the porcelain of the portraits Rosalie had seen in shop windows. It was the color of old parchment, translucent and stretched tight over hollow cheekbones. Her eyes were sunken, staring into a middle distance where no light could reach. "Your meal," Gilbert barked, his voice devoid of any shred of humanity. He leaned against the doorframe, his eyes fixed on the prisoner with a predatory boredom. The woman did not move at first. Then, with a slow, agonizing grace that seemed to belong to another world, she turned her head. Her hair, which should have been a crown of powdered gold, was a tangled nest of gray and white, falling in clumps over her thin shoulders, the physical manifestation of a soul being dismantled piece by piece. Rosalie stepped closer, her gaze falling upon the woman's hands. They were trembling, the fingers long and elegant, but tipped with broken nails. As Rosalie set the tray down on the damp bed, her eyes met the prisoner's. For a heartbeat, the revolutionary frenzy of the streets outside vanished. There was no widow Capet. There was no monster. There was only a woman, a mother, a human being who had been systematically erased. The prisoner looked at the gruel, then up at Rosalie. A ghost of a smile, haunting and tragic, touched her cracked lips. "Thank you, child," she whispered. Her voice was thin, like the wind whistling through a graveyard, yet it possessed a melodic refinement that no amount of filth could bury. In that moment, the realization crashed over Rosalie with the force of a tidal wave. This broken creature, sitting in a puddle of river water while rats scratched at the corners of her cell, was the woman for whom kings had once bowed. This was the heart of Versailles. This was the most powerful woman in Europe, now reduced to prisoner number 280. Rosalie felt a sob catch in her throat. She looked at the two armed guards standing in the shadows, their eyes never leaving the queen, documenting her every breath as if she were a caged animal. The horror of it was not the death that awaited her at the guillotine, but the slow, methodical theft of her dignity that was happening right now, in the silence of cell 12. As Rosalie backed out of the cell, the heavy door began to swing shut. The last thing she saw was the queen's hollow eyes turning back to the barred window, high above, where the gray Paris sky offered no hope, only the cold promise of the blade. The dampness of the Conciergerie was not a silent intruder. It was a rhythmic, suffocating presence that pulsed with the rising tide of the sin. Inside cell 12, the air was thick with the smell of wet limestone and the acrid smoke of a single guttering candle that struggled to push back the encroaching shadows. For Marie Antoinette, once the sun around which the world of Versailles revolved, the very concept of space had shrunk to 3 square meters of weeping stone. But the walls were not her only prison. The eyes were her true cage. To her left, seated on a wooden bench bolted to the floor, were the two shadows that never slept. Dufresne, a man with a face like pitted iron and eyes that held the cold neutrality of a butcher, sat sharpening a small blade against a whetstone. The metallic shink-shink sound was the clock by which Marie now measured her life. Beside him sat Barricine, younger but hollower, a man whose revolutionary fervor had long since curdled into a cruel, voyeuristic boredom. He didn't just watch her. He studied her as one might study a dying insect pinned to a board. The decree of the Revolutionary Tribunal was absolute. Prisoner 280 was to be under constant 24-hour surveillance. There were no doors to be closed, no curtains to be drawn, and no corners where the gaze of the Republic could not reach. Every breath she drew, every involuntary shiver that racked her thin frame, and every private moment of human necessity was recorded in their ledgers as a triumph of people's justice. This was the systematic destruction of the soul, a psychological dismantling designed to ensure that by the time she reached the scaffold, there would be nothing left of the queen, but a broken, hollow shell. Rosalie entered the cell again, her heart sinking as she saw the queen huddled on the edge of the iron bed. Marie's hands were fumbling with the fastenings of her black bodice. The dampness had seeped into her bones, and her clothes were heavy with the stagnant moisture of the cell. She looked at Rosalie, her eyes pleading, not for food, not for a way out, but for a single moment of dignity. "The queen, the prisoner needs to change," Rosalie whispered, her voice trembling as she addressed the guards. Dufresne didn't even look up from his whetstone. "The law does not recognize needs, girl. It recognizes security. We do not take our eyes off the Austrian, not for a second." Marie's face flushed a deep, painful crimson, the last vestige of her royal blood rising in protest. With a trembling hand, she reached for a ragged, moth-eaten piece of canvas that Rosalie had managed to smuggle in earlier, intended to be draped over a cord as a makeshift screen. It was a pathetic, flimsy thing, but to Marie, it was the last border of her empire. As Rosalie helped her stand, Marie's legs buckled. The queen leaned heavily on the servant, her breath coming in ragged gasps. With agonizing slowness, they began to tie the cord. Marie stepped behind the thin fabric, her silhouette cast large and shaking against the moldy wall by the candlelight. Barasin stood up. His chair scraped across the stone floor with a sound like a scream. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the heavy air. "Concealment is the tool of traitors." "It is only for a moment," Rosalie cried out, stepping between the guard and the screen. "Have you no mother, no sister? She's a woman, monsieur." "She is a prisoner," Barasin hissed. He stepped forward, his hand outstretching like a talon. Behind the screen, Marie was struggling. Her fingers, stiff with cold and weakened by the constant loss of blood from her illness, could not manage the laces. She was exposed, half-clothed in the freezing dark, clutching the tattered fabric to her chest. With a violent jerk, Barasin grabbed the top of the canvas screen. "No!" Marie's voice was a strangled sob, a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 years of fallen majesty. The guard ripped the screen down. The cord snapped, the sound echoing like a pistol shot in the tiny cell. The fabric fell into the puddle of river water on the floor, instantly turning gray and sodden. Marie Antoinette stood frozen, her back pressed against the weeping stone wall. Her thin shoulders were bare, her skin translucent in the harsh light. She tried to cover herself with her arms, her head bowed low, her gray hair falling forward like a veil of shame. Barasin laughed, a dry, rattling sound that held no joy. "You see, Dufresne, no daggers, just a withered old woman. Where is your gold now, Majesty? Where is your throne?" Dufresne didn't laugh, but he didn't look away either. He simply continued his ledger, writing down the time, 10 o'clock. The prisoner attempted to hide, surveillance maintained. Rosalie rushed forward, throwing her own shawl over the Queen's shoulders, shielding her from the predatory stares. She felt Marie's body shaking, not with the cold, but with a profound, soul-crushing humiliation. The Queen didn't scream. She didn't lash out. She simply sank to her knees on the cold floor, her forehead resting against the damp stone. In that moment, the crown was truly gone. The revolutionaries had realized that to kill a queen, they didn't need a blade. They only needed to deny her the right to be a woman in the dark. As the guards settled back into their positions, their eyes fixed once more on their prey, the only sound in the cell was the rhythmic shink-shink of the whetstone and the soft, broken weeping of a woman who had finally been stripped of everything but her breath. The darkness of the Conciergerie was never truly black. It was a bruised, heavy gray that seemed to press against the lungs. As autumn deepened, the dampness rising from the Seine became a frigid mist that clung to the stone walls of cell 12 like a shroud. Marie Antoinette lay curled on her narrow iron bed, her body a map of radiating pain. It was a sharp, gnawing heat in her abdomen, a relentless tearing that felt as though the revolution were not just outside her walls, but inside her very womb, dismantling her from within. Every movement was a gamble against a fresh wave of agony. She was suffering from advanced uterine cancer, though the word was unknown to her. She only knew it as the great sickness that turned her days into a blur of fever and her nights into a trial of blood. The hemorrhaging was constant now. It was a silent, crimson thief, stealing the last of her strength, leaving her skin the color of curdled milk. In the hallways, the revolutionary doctors, men like Dr. Thierry, a man with a clinical indifference and a heart hardened by political zeal, dismissed her condition with a sneer. To them, she was not a patient. She was a waste of the Republic's resources. Thierry believed that the Austrian woman was merely faking her ailments to garner sympathy or delay the inevitable. He walked the halls with a leather bag that smelled of vinegar and old blood, offering tinctures to the guards, but never stepping foot inside cell 12 to examine the woman who was slowly bleeding to death. Rosalie entered the cell during the hour when the city above was silent. save for the distant, rhythmic cry of the night watchman. The two guards, Dufresne and Barracine, had grown bored of their prey's stillness and had slumped into a heavy, whiskey-scented doze at their post. The single candle on the floor had burned down to a stump, its flame dancing wildly in the draft. Rosalie approached the bed, her heart breaking at the sight of the Queen's face, etched with lines of pain that no crown could ever hide. The scent of copper was thick in the stagnant air. Marie's linen chemise was ruined, soaked through with the evidence of her failing body. "I have brought fresh cloth, madame," Rosalie whispered, her voice barely a breath. Marie opened her eyes. They were hollowed out by suffering, yet they flickered with a desperate, momentary gratitude. With Rosalie's help, she managed to sit up, a low groan escaping her lips as the movement triggered a fresh spasm of pain. She was a woman who had once been attended by a dozen ladies-in-waiting, whose morning ritual was a choreographed dance of silk and perfume. Now, her most intimate survival depended on the courage of a servant girl and a bucket of cold, brackish water. Rosalie worked with frantic, quiet efficiency. She pulled a basin from beneath the bed and began the grim task of cleaning the blood-stained strips of fabric that served as Marie's only protection. There was no clean laundry service in the Antechamber of Death. There was only the secret labor of a girl who refused to let a human being rot in her own misery. As Rosalie dipped the cloths into the water, the clear liquid turned a dark, murky red. She scrubbed at the stains under the feeble light of the candle, her fingers numbing in the icy water. Each splash felt like a thunderclap in the silence of the cell. She looked up and saw Marie watching her. A single tear escaped the Queen's eye, carving a path through the grime on her cheek. "I am so sorry, Rosalie," Marie murmured, her voice cracking, "that you must see this, that you must touch this filth." Rosalie shook her head, her own vision blurring. "It is not filth, madame. It is your life, and they shall not take your dignity while I have breath." The climax of the night came in a moment of shared, shattering vulnerability. As Rosalie wrung out a heavy daibang bandage, the metallic scent and the weight of the Queen's suffering seemed to collapse the distance between them. They were no longer queen and servant. They were two women trapped in a world that hated them both, one for her crown, the other for her compassion. Marie reached out and took Rosalie's wet, cold hand. The Queen began to sob, not the loud, performative wailing of the theater, but a jagged, silent shaking that racked her frail chest. Rosalie pulled the Queen toward her, cradling Marie's head against her shoulder. They sat there on the edge of the iron bed, huddled together in the flickering light, weeping in a silence so profound it felt like a prayer. Outside, the guards stirred in their sleep, but inside the circle of candlelight, for a few precious minutes, the tattered bandages and the scent of blood were transformed into a testament of endurance. The Republic could take her palaces, her children, and her privacy, but as Rosalie scrubbed the blood from the cloth, she realized they could never truly erase the humanity that bled from a broken heart. The dawn of October 14th, 1793, did not bring light to the Conciergerie. It brought a cold, suffocating fog that tasted of wet ash. Marie Antoinette was lead from her cell, her body trembling not from fear, but from the sheer effort of standing. The hemorrhaging from the previous night had left her lightheaded, her vision blurring at the edges. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a ghost being dragged to a theater of cruelty. The courtroom of the Revolutionary Tribunal was a cavernous space filled with the stench of unwashed bodies and the predatory heat of a mob hungry for a fall. High on the bench sat Herman, the president of the tribunal, a man whose face was a mask of rigid, unyielding stone. Beside him was Antoine Quentin Fouquier-Tinville, the public prosecutor, a man with ink-stained fingers and a voice like the grinding of rusted gears. He did not seek justice, he sought a harvest of heads. Fouquier-Tinville shuffled his papers, his eyes gleaming with a malicious intent that went beyond political ideology. He began with the expected charges: conspiracy, treason, the exhaustion of the national treasury. But as the hours dragged on, the air in the room grew thick with a new, darker poison. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a theatrical, conspiratorial hiss. "We have a testimony," he announced, "from the young Louis Charles, the former Dauphin." The room went silent. Marie felt a cold blade of dread pierce her chest. She knew what they had done. They had taken her son, an 8-year-old boy, and locked him in a dark room with Antoine Simon, a cobbler turned jailer with a penchant for gin and brutality. Simon was a man who saw the boy not as a child, but as a royal weed to be crushed. He had spent weeks plying the boy with alcohol, depriving him of sleep, and whispering terrors into his ear, until the child would sign anything just to make the darkness stop. "The boy," Fouquier-Tinville continued, "has confessed to acts of indecency, acts initiated by his own mother." The accusation hung in the air like a foul mist. It was a lie so grotesque, so meticulously engineered to incinerate a woman's last shred of dignity, that it momentarily stunned even the jeering crowd. This was the ultimate weapon of the revolution, the manipulation of a child's innocence to destroy the mother's soul. They weren't just killing her body, they were poisoning her legacy as a mother. Marie remained motionless. Her head was bowed, her gray hair falling over her hollow face. She did not answer. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "Why do you not respond?" Herman demanded from the bench, his voice echoing off the cold stone. "The witness has spoken. Do you have nothing to say to such a monstrous charge?" Marie Antoinette slowly lifted her head. For the first time in months, the exhaustion seemed to vanish from her eyes, replaced by a searing, white-hot spark of maternal agony. She did not look at the judges. She did not look at the prosecutor. She turned her gaze to the galleries where the women of Paris, the market wives, the mothers, the sisters who had come to watch her die, were sitting. "I have not answered," she began, her voice low but carrying to the furthest corner of the hall, "because nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge made against a mother." She took a step forward, her hands clutching the railing of the dock so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I appeal to all mothers who may be here." Her voice rose, cracking with a raw, primal power that cut through the revolutionary vitriol like a lightning bolt. "Is there one among you who could believe such an abomination? I ask you, as mothers, is such a crime even possible?" The effect was instantaneous. A profound, tomb-like silence descended upon the courtroom. The jeering stopped. The women in the gallery, many of whom had spent years cursing her name, suddenly looked away, some clutching their own chests, others wiping tears from their eyes. In that single, desperate heartbeat, the Austrian monster had vanished, and only a mother's broken heart remained. Even Fouquier-Tinville hesitated, his papers fluttering in his hand. He had expected a queen to plead for her life. He had not expected a woman to fight for her honor with the strength of a dying lioness. But the machinery of the revolution was indifferent to the truth of the heart. Herman quickly pounded his gavel, the wooden thud shattering the fragile moment of humanity. "Silence!" he roared, though the room was already quiet. "The trial will proceed." As Marie was led back to the shadows, her strength spent, she saw Rosalie standing near the exit, her face wet with tears. The Queen's victory was small and fleeting, a flicker of light in a hurricane of blood. She had saved her honor in the eyes of the mothers of France, but she knew the price. By defending her soul, she had only sharpened the blade that waited for her neck. The trial had not ended with the verdict. It had ended with the silence of the mothers. A silence that followed Marie Antoinette back into the bowels of the Conciergerie. By the time the heavy iron doors of cell 12 groaned shut, The candle was nothing but a pool of cold wax. The queen sank onto the edge of her bed, her spine curved like a dying vine. The psychological assault of the day, the accusation that had struck at the very root of her motherhood, had achieved what months of dampness and hunger could not. It had finally shattered the internal clock that kept her soul tethered to her body. Outside the prison walls, the city of Paris was feasting on a different kind of image. Jacques-René Hébert, a radical journalist with a face etched by cynicism and a pen dipped in acid, was overseeing the late-night printing of Le Père Duchesne. He stood in a cluttered office smelling of ink and cheap tobacco, watching as the presses churned out caricatures of the Austrian she-wolf. In these drawings, Marie was not a woman, but a grotesque hook-nosed witch with talons for hands, clutching the bones of the poor. Hébert knew that for the revolution to succeed, the people must never see the shivering, bleeding woman in the cell. They must only see the monster they were told to hate. While the ink was still wet on those lies, Rosalie entered the cell with a basin of warm water she had begged from the kitchen. The light from her lantern fell upon the queen, and Rosalie nearly dropped the basin. In the span of a single night, the last vestige of the woman who had enchanted Europe had vanished. Marie's hair, which had been streaked with gray during her captivity, had turned a stark, ghostly white. It wasn't the dignified white of a peaceful old age. It was the bleached color of bone, brittle and lifeless. As Marie turned her head, large clumps of hair fell away, drifting to the damp floor like fallen petals in a winter frost. "Madame?" Rosalie whispered, her voice thick with horror. Marie did not look at her. She was staring at the wall, her eyes wide and glassy, reflecting a world Rosalie could not see. "The colors are gone, Rosalie," the queen murmured, her voice a hollow rasp. "I used to dream of the blue silks of Trianon. Now, everything is white, like the shroud they are preparing for me." Rosalie sat behind her, taking up a small wooden comb. As she began to draw it through the tangled, snowy mess, more hair came away in the teeth of the comb. Marie's scalp was pale and translucent, mapped with blue veins. Rosalie's hands trembled. She expected Marie to flinch, to cry out at the tugging of the knots, or to weep for the loss of her once famed beauty. But there was nothing. Marie Antoinette sat as still as a marble statue in a forgotten garden. Her body, which had been racked by the sharp agonies of her illness just hours before, seemed to have retreated into a profound, terrifying numbness. The climax of the night came when Rosalie encountered a particularly stubborn tangle near the queen's neck. In her haste and distress, the comb slipped, its sharp teeth scraping deeply against Marie's skin. A thin line of red appeared on the pale flesh. Rosalie gasped, dropping the comb. "Oh, madame, I am so sorry. I have hurt you," Rosalie cried, reaching out to staunch the blood. Marie slowly lifted a hand to her neck, touching the wound. She looked at her fingertip, stained with her own crimson life, and then looked at Rosalie with a terrifying, distant calm. "I feel nothing, Rosalie," Marie said, and for a moment the ghost of a smile touched her lips, a smile more tragic than any sob. "The pain. It cannot find me anymore. They have taken so much that there is no room left for the sting of a comb, or the bite of the cold. I am already on the other side." Rosalie began to sob, her tears falling into the white hair she held in her hands. She realized then that the revolutionaries had won a hollow victory. They had sought to break her spirit through suffering, but they had pushed her so far into the abyss that she had become untouchable. As Rosalie continued to comb the remaining strands of white, the only sound in the cell was the scratching of the wooden teeth and the distant muffled roar of the Paris mob, unaware that the woman they intended to kill had already died piece by piece in the silence of the night, The morning of October 16, 1793, arrived with a sky the color of cold slate. The mist from the Seine had thickened, crawling through the iron bars of the Conciergerie like a ghost seeking warmth. Inside the prison, the ritual of the end began. Marie Antoinette was led to a small chamber where the executioner's assistants waited. Her once magnificent hair, now a brittle white crown of sorrow, was brutally shorn to the nape of her neck. This was not a haircut. It was a harvest of her remaining dignity, meant to ensure the blade of the guillotine would find no obstruction. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back, the coarse hemp rope biting into her translucent skin. For a woman who had lived her life in the gentle embrace of silk, the friction of the rope was a final physical insult. She was dressed in a simple white gown, not the white of a bride, but the white of a sacrificial lamb, already stained with the sweat of her fever and the dampness of her cell. Outside the fortress, the procession of shame awaited. For King Louis XVI, the Republic had granted the small mercy of a closed carriage, shielding him from the eyes of the vengeful. But for Marie Antoinette, the Austrian, the revolutionaries demanded a spectacle. Standing in the courtyard was a tumbril, a common open wooden cart used for hauling manure and refuse. Henri Sanson, the son of the high executioner, and a man who performed his grim duties with a haunting, silent precision, gripped Marie's elbow to lead her to the cart. He was younger than his father, with eyes that had seen too many heads fall to hold any room for hatred or pity. He was merely the pilot of this final, rattling journey. As the cart creaked out of the prison gates and onto the cobblestones of Paris, the sound of the mob hit Marie like a physical blow. The streets were a sea of jagged teeth and screaming mouths. This was the public shaming, a calculated revolutionary tactic designed to strip a prisoner of their humanity before the blade ever touched them. They wanted to see her break. They wanted to see the former Queen of France cowering in the filth of a trash cart. In the crowd stood Marianne, a fishwife from the markets who had walked miles just to see the wolf die. She held a rotten cabbage in her hand, her face contorted with a lifetime of hunger and resentment. She represented the thousands who had been conditioned to believe that this one woman was the source of all their misery. "Look at her!" Marianne shrieked, flinging the cabbage. It struck the side of the cart, splattering Marie's white dress with green slime. "Where is your cake now, Madame Deficit?" The cart jolted and swayed, the wooden wheels groaning under the weight of the hatred surrounding it. People leaned from balconies to spit upon her. They held up grotesque effigies and screamed obscenities that no human should ever have to hear. The noise was a rhythmic, soul-crushing chant of "Death to the Austrian." Rosalie followed the cart as far as the guards would allow, her heart shattering with every step. She watched as Marie sat on the rough wooden plank of the tumbril. The Queen's hands were tied so tightly she could not even brush away the filth thrown at her. The climax of the journey came as the cart passed the church of Saint-Roch. The crowd surged forward, nearly toppling the tumbril, their voices reaching a fever pitch of vitriol. For a moment, it seemed the mob would tear her limb from limb before she could reach the scaffold. But then, something shifted. Marie Antoinette, despite the white hair, the tattered gown, and the ropes cutting into her wrists, drew a long, ragged breath and straightened her spine. She lifted her chin, her hollow eyes staring straight ahead into the distance, far beyond the reach of the screaming faces. Her gaze was not one of defiance, but of a profound, icy emptiness, a stoicism that acted as an invisible shield. She sat as still as if she were on her throne at Versailles, her quiet dignity turning the trash cart into a chariot of thorns. The more the crowd screamed, the more silent she became. Her refusal to meet their gaze, her refusal to weep, and her refusal to beg for mercy created a vacuum of power that the mob could not fill. Marianne, the fishwife, lowered her hand. the second piece of refuse falling to the ground unused. There was something in the Queen's steady, vacant stare that made the screams feel hollow. As the cart turned toward the Place de la Révolution, where the silhouette of the guillotine waited against the gray sky, Marie Antoinette remained unbowed. She was no longer a victim of their insults. She had retreated to a place where their words could no longer wound her. The journey on the open cart, intended to be her ultimate humiliation, had instead become her final silent victory of the spirit. The tumbrel came to a jarring halt at the foot of the scaffold in the Place de la Révolution. The air here was thicker, heavy with the scent of damp sawdust, and the copper tang of blood that had soaked into the wood of the platform over months of tireless use. Above the sea of red liberty caps stood the national razor, the guillotine, its tall wooden uprights framing a blade that caught the dull gray light of the October noon. To the revolutionaries, this machine was a triumph of Enlightenment humanity, a swift, egalitarian end that supposedly replaced the agonizing tortures of the old regime with a single mechanical blink of an eye. But as Marie Antoinette looked up at the towering structure, she saw only the final cold instrument of her erasure. Henri Sanson reached out to assist her from the cart. His grip was firm, yet strangely devoid of the malice she had encountered in the prison guards. He was a professional in a world of amateurs, a man whose life was governed by the somber gravity of the final right. Standing atop the wooden platform was his father, Charles-Henri Sanson, the High Executioner of Paris. Charles-Henri was a man of immense, tragic stature. His hair was white, and his eyes carried the haunted depth of one who had ushered thousands, including a king, into the next world. He stood with his hands behind his back, a silent sentinel of the Republic's will. As Marie Antoinette stepped onto the first wooden stair, her body betrayed her once more. The hemorrhaging that had plagued her in the Conciergerie had left her lightheaded, and the heavy, coarse white gown, soaked with her own sweat, clung to her shivering frame. She stumbled. The crowd, sensing her weakness, erupted into a fresh roar of mockery. "The Austrian falls!" they screamed. "She cannot even walk to her own wedding with the blade." But she did not fall. With a jagged, indomitable breath, she straightened herself. Every step up the stairs was a victory over the systematic dehumanization she had endured for 76 days. She moved past the shouting mobs, past the memory of her stolen children, and past the pain that had consumed her nights. She walked toward the center of the platform, where the leather-bound plank, the bascule, waited to receive her. The sun broke through the clouds for a fleeting second, illuminating the pale, translucent skin of her face and her shorn, snowy hair. She looked out over the crowd, her hollow eyes distant and calm. In that moment, she was no longer a prisoner, nor a widow, nor a victim. She was a human being, reclaiming the space where her soul resided. As she moved toward the executioner to take her position, the platform was slick with the mist and the blood of those who had gone before her. In her weakened state, her foot slipped, and she accidentally trod heavily upon the foot of Charles-Henri Sanson. The executioner flinched, a small involuntary movement of surprise. The crowd gasped, expecting a final outburst of royal arrogance or a scream of terror. They waited for her to beg, to curse, or to collapse. Instead, Marie Antoinette turned her head slightly toward the man who was about to take her life. Her voice, though thin and worn like frayed silk, was clear and steady. It held the polite silver resonance of the salons of Versailles, a sound that felt as though it came from a vanished age of elegance and kindness. "Pardon me, monsieur," she whispered, her eyes meeting his with a soft, heartbreaking sincerity. "I did not do it on purpose." The words rippled across the platform. In a world that had stripped her of her privacy, her health, and her family, She had reached into the core of her being and pulled out the one thing they could not touch: her civility. This was not the politeness of a queen to a subject. It was the kindness of one human soul to another at the threshold of eternity. Charles-Henri Sanson froze. For a man who had seen everything, this small, poignant act of grace was more jarring than any scream. He bowed his head almost imperceptibly, a final, silent salute to a woman who had remained a person even when the world treated her as an object. The blade fell at exactly 12 noon. In its swift, cold mercy, it ended a life that had been destroyed piece by piece long before. As the crowd roared and the blood stained the sawdust, the echoes of her last words lingered in the air, a final, quiet proof that even in the face of systematic cruelty, the light of human dignity cannot be completely extinguished. The guillotine had long since rusted into silence, and the blood that once stained the Place de la Révolution had been washed away by decades of rain and the indifferent march of time. Paris had moved on, burying its ghosts beneath the cobblestones of a new empire. But for Rosalie Lamorlière, the damp walls of Cell 12 never truly faded. She was no longer the trembling girl with lie-stained hands. She was an elderly woman now, living in a small, sun-drenched room filled with the scent of lavender and old paper. Her hair had turned the same snowy white she had once combed in the dark, but her mind remained a sharp, painful archive of the 76 days that history had tried to sanitize. For over 2 centuries, the official narrative of the revolution had been written by the victors. They spoke of justice, of liberty, and of the necessary end of a tyrant. They had sealed the archives of the Conciergerie, deeming the intimate details of Marie Antoinette's captivity too shameful, too cruel, and too revealing of the Republic's own barbarity to ever be made public. The world remembered a caricature, a symbol of greed, or a stoic martyr. They did not remember the woman who bled in the dark, or the mother whose heart was weaponized against her. Rosalie sat at her wooden desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a bundle of brittle, yellowed pages. These were her secret memoirs, the hushed diaries of a witness who had seen the systematic destruction of a human soul. Beside her stood Monsieur de Robien, a young, idealistic historian with spectacles perched on his nose and a reverence for the truth that outweighed his fear of the past. He was part of a new generation, one that sought to look into the shadows and amplify the voices of the forgotten. "Is the world ready, Rosalie?" he asked softly, his hand hovering over the manuscript. Rosalie looked out the window at the peaceful streets of a transformed France. "The world is never ready for the truth, monsieur. But the truth does not care. It only waits for someone to tell it." The subplot of the suppressed records began to unfold. As de Robien began to cross-reference Rosalie's accounts with the brittle letters of the guards and the chilling reports of the director, a horrifying picture emerged. They discovered the systematic sexualized violence disguised as duty, the calculated denial of medical care, and the deliberate erasure of privacy. It became clear that Marie Antoinette's execution was not a single moment at noon on October 16th. It was 1,000 tiny deaths, inflicted every hour by men who believed that to kill a symbol, they had to first destroy the woman. The news of the memoir's publication sent a shockwave through the intellectual heart of Europe. The archives of power were finally forced open. People read of the politeness to the very end and the final act of humanity in a world that had stripped her of every vestige of it. The grotesque caricatures were replaced by the image of a dying mother, appealing to the hearts of other mothers. The climax of this long-delayed justice occurred on a quiet afternoon at the Conciergerie, now a museum of stone and memory. A group of visitors stood before the reconstructed Cell 12. Among them was a young mother, holding her son's hand. she read the plaque, which now contained the unvarnished reality of what had transpired within those walls. The forced exposure, the psychological torture, and the quiet resilience of the prisoner. In that moment, the symbol vanished. The Austrian vanished. The monster vanished. A profound silence descended upon the room, much like the silence that had once gripped the courtroom when Marie appealed to the mothers of France. For the first time, the world truly understood. They saw the broken body meticulously prepared for the blade, but they also saw the spirit that had remained unbowed. Marie Antoinette was no longer a political tool. She was a human being who had finally been granted the one thing the revolution tried to deny her: the right to be remembered with truth. Rosalie, hearing the reports of the people's changing hearts, closed her eyes and took a long, peaceful breath. The stones still remember, but now so did the living. The Antechamber of Death was no longer a place of erasure, but a monument to the endurance of the human soul. Death had been her grim salvation, but the truth was her ultimate liberation. As the sun set over the Seine, casting long golden fingers across the towers of the Conciergerie, the shadows seemed a little less heavy. The darker threads of history had been brought to light, and in that light, the forgotten victims finally found their peace. The story of Marie Antoinette's final days leaves us with a profound lesson that echoes far beyond the stone walls of the 18th century. In our modern world, where judgment is swift and empathy is often scarce, we must remember that the line between seeking justice and practicing vengeance is dangerously thin. The greatest cruelty was not the blade of the guillotine, but the systematic way in which a human being's dignity was stripped away before her life ever ended. In our daily lives, it is easy to label, judge, or ignore the suffering of others because of their status or the narratives told about them. But every person is a living soul with sacred wounds and quiet hopes. To protect the dignity of another, especially those the world tells us to hate, is the ultimate way to preserve our own humanity. Do not let these hidden truths fade back into the archives of the forgotten. If this story touched your heart and you believe that the truth deserves to be told, help us light the way. Like this video if you believe in the sanctity of human dignity. Share this story so that the victims of history are no longer silenced. Comment below with your thoughts on Marie Antoinette's resilience. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to join us in uncovering the dark truths history tried to bury. May peace and strength be with you always. In the storms of your own life, may you keep a kind heart and a resilient spirit, just like the light that refused to go out in the darkness of Cell 12. May God bless you and your loved ones, shielding you from injustice and filling your path with compassion. If you believe in a world where mercy triumphs over cruelty, please write Amen in the comments. Thank you for watching. And remember, the stones may remember, but now, so do you.